Hello and welcome everybody to today's video and to a direct response video for today. So the other day I was perusing the YouTubes and I saw a video by ChazzaHDF1 about why Gasly should be dropped from Red Bull. And this is going to be a direct response to that video. And before I start anything off, I just want to say the guy generally has great insights. I'm not trying to attack him. It's not saying that he's wrong. This is just my opinion. As he stated at the end of his video, that's just his opinion. There's no hate involved there. And this is just my opinion and sort of a rebuttal on Gasly's behalf for why I think that maybe he's a little bit underrated and might be able to do a little bit more in the future than we give him credit for. So to start the video out, the first point I want to make is I accept that Gasly has not been lighting the world on fire. He's a younger driver and he's in a brand new car. I think that we have to give him a little bit of time to settle in there. Even Danny Ricciardo, who's a much more experienced driver, arguably a more talented driver at this point, has had a really hard time adapting to that Renault. He's kind of been nowhere. And yes, Renault hasn't been where they thought they were going to be at all. But this is an arguably better driver, still taking a long time to adapt to that new car. There's actually a bit about it in the new Beyond the Grid that they had with Nico Hülkenberg. They sat down, talked to him during the race in Montreal, and he talks about how difficult it's been for Ricciardo, even though he's a great driver, to adapt to the new car, and potentially how much different that is from a Red Bull. And I think that what some people forget is that the Red Bull is a very different car to the other cars on the grid. It's designed a lot differently from anything else that you might see out there. And in being such, it's a lot harder to drive. I think a lot of it has to do with the intense levels of downforce that it generates and the difference in cornering. And I think that that's sort of where Ricciardo has struggled with the new Renault that he's driving, is trying to turn the car like he used to be able to turn the Red Bull. And I don't think that Gasly has yet figured that out. And I think that that's going to take a little bit of time. The other thing I want to mention too is, while I think Gasly's not a horrible driver, I think you have to look at his competition. So right now in that top six, you have a 5 times world champion, a 4 times world champion, a very good number 2 at Mercedes, who has returned to form in an incredible way this year by all accounts, in Valtteri Bottas. And then you have 2 of the best young drivers that this sport probably will see in the next 20 years. These 2 in Leclerc and Verstappen are probably our next Hamilton Vettel in terms of projecting out to the future, and will go down in history as 2 of the greatest drivers in F1 just on flat skill alone. So when you look at Gasly in comparison with those 5 drivers, yeah, I don't think he's there. But then again, look down the grid. I don't think anybody else is either. I don't really think that honestly there's anybody else on the grid at that level. And this is from a guy who is not a fan of 4 of the top 5 for the most part. Not that I don't like them, I'm just not a flag-waving fan. I do really like Leclerc as a guy. Seems like a really chill dude, got a good head on his shoulders for his age. So that's the one that I'm maybe biased towards, just because he's a super likable dude. And it's not that I dislike the other ones, it's nothing like that at all. It's just I'm not like a super fan or anything like that, so I wouldn't go to bat for them purely out of bias, I'll say. For the first point, just to wrap that all up, I would say he hasn't got the hang of the car yet, but I think he will. It'll take time, but he will. We're only a third of the way through his first season, and it's difficult to come to terms with a new car that quickly. So I think that'll happen, and I think, yeah, he doesn't stack up to the 5 in front of him, but I don't think that you find many down the grid that do. So if you could leave in the comments if you think somebody on the grid right now is on the level of those top 5, you can throw it in. Like, I would say maybe Ricciardo, but even then, the guy's a race winner, but he's never won championships. He's never even really contended for one in his time in the sport. So you can't really hold them up to someone of that skill level. or a group of that skill level. So yeah, he struggled, but I think you're comparing him to the greatest in the sport and some of the greatest of our generation, and he's a comfortable sixth usually, at the point in most races where he can make a stop, get fresh tires, come back out. Yes, in Canada there was a bit of trouble for him. He didn't finish great there, but it's not a great track for Red Bull usually. They're a little bit better now with the Honda engine, but just not one of their tracks. And I think, yeah, not a great race, but you can't just look at maybe one race, let's say, and just hold up to the whole season, because I think he's done good work in some of the other races. The next point that I want to make is on his comparison to Hartley and his being deserving of getting that promotion from Toro Rosso. And in the video, Chazza mentions that by the end of the season, Hartley actually was beating Gasly a couple times, whether qualifying or in the race. I would say overall, Hartley got pretty thoroughly stomped throughout the season. They ended with points that were like 29-4 in favor of Gasly. Hartley was nowhere close. You can't look at last season and pretend that Hartley was even a little bit of the driver that Gasly was. The best finish for Gasly was a 4th. Hartley finished 9th, and that would have amounted 2 of his 4 points. So yeah, not really a great comparison there. And then when you're talking about the end of the season especially, let us not forget that Red Bull put a glut of upgrades into Toro Rosso at the end of last season to try to get ready for the Honda upgrade for this season. So there were a lot of grid penalties. And because Hartley is amazing at giving feedback on cars, and I think a lot of the reason why he was brought into Toro Rosso in the first place was to provide feedback to Honda and to Red Bull about the upgrades and about where the car was going, I think that they may have been giving him different upgrades from Gasly at different times, and with all the grid penalties involved, I just don't think you can look at the end of last season and even really hope to compare the two. Over the course of the season, let us all accept that Hartley was thoroughly routed. And at the time of the silly season last year, I thought that Gasly was probably the best possible person to put in that car that was available to Red Bull at that time. I wasn't really doubting it, especially with Hartley there. There was just no real competition. So the next point I want to bring up would be his comparison to Albon and Kvyat. In the video, Chazza kind of explains that if Gasly was on a team with either Kvyat or Albon, that he wouldn't have looked as good, and that maybe one of those two would have got the seat. I don't think that that's the case. I would want to remind him that even now, though Albon and Kvyat are doing very well this season, they aren't really on pace to thoroughly rout Gasly from last season. Right now, if we were to project out the rest of the season, right now Kvyat is at 10 points, Albon is at 7 points. If you were to just multiply that by 3, right now Kvyat would finish with 30 points, and Albon would finish with 21 points. So last year's total for Gasly, 29 points. Kvyat would beat him by 1 point. Right now, Albon isn't really close. We never know what the rest of the season is going to do, obviously. And we don't know if by the end of the season, this Toro Rosso team will get flooded with upgrades, and Albon and Kvyat will be starting from the back of the grid every race. We don't exactly know that yet. So it's hard to say that either of them would stack up amazingly with Gasly of last year. I think that they would have been just as equal, because I think last year there was a lot of noise about Gasly being one of the best young drivers on the grid, and his 4th place was a huge moment for Toro Rosso, an incredible race for him. Stuff like that you can't take away from them. It's similar to when people talk about Lance Stroll and they say, well, he's not a very good driver, but he did get that 3rd in Baku, and everyone says, oh, well, this and that, and there was retirements, and it doesn't matter. The guy raced a great race, and he managed to finish 3rd place. Like Gasly managed to finish 4th. You can't take that away from someone. Still was a great drive, in my opinion, and I think put him up against Kvyat, put him up against Albon, you're not going to see a massive chasm between him and either of them. So I don't really see that point holding up too much, at least under a greater level of scrutiny. I think it would have been a pretty even team, and I think you even still this year, let's say Gasly debuted this year, if he was Albon's teammate or Kvyat's teammate, I think we'd be saying exactly the same thing that we're saying about Kvyat and Albon this year, is wow, these guys are quick. You know, for a couple of guys that no one really saw coming, definitely a quick couple of guys. I think give Gasly time, let him learn the car. If by the end of the season he is still a minute off the top 4 or the top 5 in that 6th place, pitting, getting the fastest lap every time, then we can talk about, yeah, okay, maybe this guy doesn't belong here, maybe he needs to move on. But I don't think it's time yet. And I think that at this point, yes, Albon is good. He's definitely shown some flashes, and Kvyat has been great in his role at Toro Rosso. I think that they're set up very well with Gasly and with Verstappen for the future. And I see Gasly as more of a Bottas, and I see Verstappen as their Hamilton. I don't think that they will eat their hat on Kvyat. I don't think they're going to promote him unless something goes horribly wrong, because I think that they'd have to swallow a little bit too much pride. And I don't see Albon coming up yet. In fact, I could see another team trying to snipe him at some point, because Gasly and Verstappen have filled up the Red Bull seats. Last year, if you remember all the penalties and you look at the real comparison with Hartley, no real comparison there. I think Gasly stacks up well against the Toro Rossos of this year, even with the amount of penalties that he had to take at the end of the year, kind of ruining his races almost every weekend, putting them at the back of the grid almost every time. So overall, I don't think he should be dropped. Let me know what you guys think. I know that there's a lot of varying opinion on him right now, and like I said at the beginning, this isn't an attack. It's not, there's no malicious intent. I'm just trying to make a video sort of giving a counterpoint to what I thought was a very well thought out video by ChazzaHDF1. So with all that being said, thank you everybody for joining me today. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't yet, go check out ChazzaHDF1's channel. Obviously, if you want to see the precursor to this side of the argument, I definitely suggest you watch his video on Gasly, just to get a background and some of the counterpoints to the points that I'm making here in this video. So thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful day, and goodbye.